Alright, the next thing we're going to go through, now that we've worked on some rational expressions, is now we're going to turn those expressions into equations. And it starts at the bottom of page 9. There's really not a whole lot to do at the bottom of page 9. It just kind of shows you some examples of what rational equations look like. And basically the bottom line is, for a rational equation, is that you have a rational expression in an equation. You have at least one, so there might be more than one. And ultimately, it has the steps here of what to do, but the bottom line is what you're trying to do is you're trying to get rid of the denominators so then you can solve for the variable. Okay, that's your goal, is to try to get rid of the denominators. And we've actually did that a while back, if you remember, when we had fractions and equations, right? So if you had something like 1/2 x plus, this is a bad example, but plus 2 equals 9. Okay, and what you could do is, the first thing you could do is you could multiply everything by 2, right? And that gets rid of your fractions. So then you just get, oops, that was a mistake there. So the 2's cancel out, and you are left with just x, and then you get plus 4 equals, and then 18, right? And then you subtract 4 on both sides, you get x equals 14. Okay, so basically it's the same thing you're going to be doing here, is you're going to be getting rid of the denominators of these fractions. But in this case, you're going to be having fractions that aren't numbers, they're expressions of some sort with variables. So, but that's the basics to it. You're just trying to get rid of the fraction. Okay. All right. So let's take a look here. We're done with page 9 there. Let's move over to page 10. And on page 10, they have the first example, and they have 1 over x equals 1 over 4 minus x. Okay, and when we were solving expressions, what did we do? We found common denominators, right? Okay, well, that's what you're going to do here. You're going to multiply both sides by the common denominator. And so in this case, the common denominator is x times 4 minus x. So you're going to multiply both sides of this equation. Okay, so both sides times x times 4 minus x. Okay, and let me move this a little bit. There we go. Give myself a little bit more room. So multiply this side over here times it 2. Okay, and then what you can do, you got to cross cancel, right? So your x and that x cancels out, and so we're left with 4 minus x times 1. Well, if you distribute that, you'll end up with 4 minus x. Okay, and then on the other side, your 4 minus x's cancel out, and you're left with the x to multiply by. So you got 1 times x, and you just get x, right? All right, so then what are we going to do? We got to solve for x now, right? So let's add x to both sides. Okay, and you have 4 equals 2x. Divide by 2, and x equals 2. All right. Now here's one thing that you have to do when you are solving these types of expressions. Okay, you need to check to make sure that the answer that you get does not make your original problem have 0 in the denominator, because when you have 0 in a denominator, hopefully you know that's an undefined part, right? So you just want to check to make sure that you won't end up with a 0. So our original equation was right, was 1 over x equals 1 over 4 minus x, right? So if we plugged the 2 back into the equation for both of our x's, right, you get 1 over 2 equals 1 over 4 minus 2, which is 2. So we're okay. Okay, you don't get 0 in a denominator, so you're all good. Now you don't actually have to go through and do this work. This is just kind of a way to make sure that you your answer is correct. Okay, but definitely do make sure, you got to check for it and see whether or not it works. Okay, let's keep going on here. All right, so the next example we have x plus 6 over x equals -5. So in this equation here, we only have one term that has a denominator. So our denominator that we're going to multiply everything by to get rid of our fractions is x. So we're going to multiply everything by x. Okay, and so when we distribute the x, we get x times x is x squared, and then x times 6 over x, those cancel, right? So we're just left with 6, and then on this side we have negative 5x. Okay, and then now you want to set it equal to 0, so you can solve for your variable, right? So plus 5x, and you have x squared plus 5x plus 6 equals 0. And this looks a lot like a quadratic formula or a quadratic equation, right? Okay, so let's just go ahead and factor this. Luckily this factor is nice and easy. So you get x, what do we have? We have plus 3 and x plus 2, right? Because 3 times 2 is 6 and 3 plus 2 is 5. Alright, then you set them each equal to 0. So x plus 3 equals 0, x plus 2 equals 0, and then you solve and you get x equals negative 3 or x equals negative 2. And if you put it back in, negative 3 could go in for your x up here, and that would be fine. Negative 2 could go in for it, and you'd be fine also. So you're all good with that one. It's just that simple, alright? So you find what you can to get rid of your denominators, and then you multiply both sides by it to get rid of your fractions, and then you can just solve for the variables. Alright, let's look at the next example on page 11. So we have x, sorry about that, x squared over x minus 1 equals 1 over x minus 1. Alright, so what's our common denominator? It's x minus 1. So we're going to multiply both sides times x minus 1. Okay, and when we do that, our x minus 1's cancel on both sides, so it just leaves the top, right? Just leaves the numerator. So x squared equals 1. Now you could do this a couple ways. You could bring the 1 over, right? I'll do it both ways for you. You could bring the 1 over, and you end up with x squared minus 1 equals 0, and then that's a difference of two squares. So you got x plus 1, x minus 1 equals 0. Then you got x plus 1 equals 0, x minus 1 equals 0, and you get x equals negative 1 or x equals 1. Okay? Now, the other way you could have done that, I'm going to go back up here for just a second. X squared equals 1. Take the square root, right? Okay, that's what you learned in the last unit. Square root of x squared is x. Square root of 1 is positive or negative 1, which that's what we got at the bottom. Alright, now, so here's where our problem comes in though. Okay, if you go back to the original equation, let me put that down here. So our original equation was x squared over x minus 1 equals 1 over x minus 1, right? Well, if you look here, if we put positive 1 in for x, okay, what's this denominator going to become? This is going to become 1 minus 1 on the bottom, right? And that becomes 0, and so does this one. Okay, well that's called an extraneous answer. It means it's an answer that you got that really doesn't solve the equation. It doesn't make it work. Okay, so in this case, when x is 1, that's actually not a correct answer. So you're going to cross that one out, and x equals negative 1 will be your only answer for this equation. Okay, so make sure that you check to make sure that your answers work. Okay, because if they don't, then you're going to end up you'll end up with part of it wrong because you didn't check them. Okay, so just check to make sure, does one of my numbers make the denominator equal 0? And if it does, then that's not an answer. Okay, alright, so right towards the bottom, page 11, you have a few try these. It goes on to page 12 as well, so give those a shot and see what happens. Okay, first try this. You have x plus 1 over x equals 2. So we only have one rational expression here, a rational term. So our denominator is just going to be x. So let's multiply everything by x. We get x squared. The x's cancel in the second one, so that's x squared plus 1. And then 2 times x is 2x. So we'll bring over our 2x. You get x squared minus 2x plus 1 equals 0. Now it's time to factor. So what do we get? X minus 1 and x minus 1. That's a perfect square trinomial, right? Okay, so we just have to do this once, really. X minus 1 equals 0, and so x equals 1. And if we put 1 back into the equation for x, we'll be okay up here because 1 over 1, and we're all good. Alright, so that's your answer. X equals 1. Alright. Alright, next one. We have x squared over x plus 2 equals 4 over x plus 2. Makes it pretty simple. Our common denominator that we're going to multiply everything by is x plus 2 on both sides, and they're both going to cancel. Okay, so everything cancels there. You're left with x squared equals 4. And again, you can bring it over the 4 if you want. Make it x squared minus 4 equals 0. Or we can just take the square root. You get x equals positive or negative 2. Okay, and then now we got to check again, right? So we have our original equation was x squared over x plus 2 equals 4 over x plus 2. And if we use negative 2, right? So if you use negative 2 in this equation, negative 2 plus 2, that becomes 0. So negative 2 can't be an answer, right? Because that comes 0 on both sides. So you can't have 0 in a denominator. That becomes undefined. So really our only answer will be x equals positive 2. Okay, so you can cross out the little negative there. Alright, so that's your only option for an answer there. The other one makes it not work. Alright, let's do the last one. Alright, so we have 1 over 2x plus 1 over x equals negative 12. Okay, so hopefully you've already figured this out. Our common denominator is 2x. So we'll multiply everything by 2x here. So they cancel there, so you're just left with 1. Over here the x's cancel. Oh, sorry about that. X's cancel, so you get 2 times 1, so you get 1 plus 2 equals, and then you get negative 24x. So 1 plus 2 is 3 equals negative 24x. Divide by negative 24, and x equals negative 1 over 8. And that's it. You can put 1 over 8 in there and they'll both work out fine. That's the bottom line. Okay, it's a pretty simple process as long as you follow your steps and you know what you're doing, you know how to factor. Yeah, so let me know if you have any questions.